Welcome everyone to our discussion diving deep into one of history's most explosive debates, Jesus. For over 2,000 years, billions have embraced the narrative of a man who walked the earth. Yet the evidence we have is as puzzling as it is fascinating.
Absolutely. It's intriguing how the narrative has evolved over centuries. I mean, think about it. From Paul's celestial portrayal to later gospel constructions, there's a lot to unpack.
Right, so let's start with that. The idea that our earliest source, Paul, never even met Jesus. Paul talks about visions and cosmic revelations rather than recounting a terrestrial life.
Yeah, exactly. And that raises the question, was Jesus initially perceived as a mythic figure, almost like an ethereal or cosmic savior, rather than a historical teacher from Nazareth?
Yep, and this is where different theories come into play. On one hand, we have the mainstream view, the historical Jesus, who was a Jewish preacher with apocalyptic expectations. But then, quite a few scholars argue for a mythicist position, suggesting Jesus as a stitched-together literary character.
Right on. It's like they've taken the narrative and, in a way, assembled it from various mythic traditions, right? Picture it like a patchwork quilt, each piece contributing a bit to what we eventually come to know.
Exactly. It's like if you think about ancient savior figures like Mithras or Osiris, they share similar patterns with the Jesus story. The idea here is that myths from earlier cultures might have merged with a budding historical memory.
That patchwork idea really throws the conventional picture into question. I mean, if early Christians were blending memories with myth, does that mean the Jesus we know is more of a composite figure than a singular historical personality?
Yes, and that's where the composite or Midrashic theory comes in. Some argue that the gospel writers essentially repurposed characters and themes from Old Testament figures, Mark drawing parallels with Elijah, Matthew with Moses, and so on. It's like each gospel writer was tailoring the narrative to serve distinct theological and political objectives.
Right. Speaking of political objectives, there's also the idea of Jesus as a political Jesus, isn't there? One where his portrayal evolved to meet certain political needs of the time, whether it was to satisfy Roman expectations of a pacifist Messiah or to unify various factions within early Christianity.
Right, absolutely. The political model suggests that Jesus' image was shaped by both the pressures from the Roman authorities and the internal dynamics of the Jewish community. It's as if his persona was a tool, malleable enough to serve different agendas.
Yeah, and that might explain why we see such contradictory depictions in the Gospels. One moment he's a revolutionary figure, and the next, a serene, almost resigned teacher. It's like, they were trying to satisfy competing needs.
Exactly. And speaking of the Gospels, all four are problematic in terms of authorship and accuracy. None of them were written firsthand by eyewitnesses. They were penned decades later, with Mark around 70 CE, Matthew and Luke even later, and John trailing into the 2nd century.
Right? Yeah, and that raises an important point about historical evidence. If these texts were composed well after the supposed events, how reliable are they as historical records?
That's a great question. Scholars like Dale Allison even note that the closer we examine these texts, the more uncertainty we encounter. Some scholars outright state that we can't be sure what, if anything, lies behind the legend.
But then, on the flip side, there are scholars like Bart Ehrman and Paula Fredriksen who insist that Jesus did exist, but admit that the stories around him have undergone significant embellishment over time.
Right, which is a fair middle ground for many. It acknowledges a historical person at the core, but questions the narrative we've inherited. However, critiques arise here, like, if Jesus truly existed as a historical figure, shouldn't there be some more contemporaneous records like Roman documents or legal records? On the head.
Exactly, and that's one of the strong points raised by mythicists. They ask, how could a miracle worker drawing massive crowds go unrecorded by Roman historians? And further, why is there such scant evidence outside later Christian writings?
Absolutely. This is where sources like Josephus and Tacitus come in. Yet both are problematic in their own ways. Josephus's Testimonium Flavianum is thought to be, at least partially, a Christian interpolation. if not a total fabrication in some eyes.
Right. And Tacitus, while referencing Christus under Pilate, wasn't an eyewitness either. His account was secondhand, pulled through the lens of late Christian scribes. This only muddies the waters further.
Yeah, it really does seem like every piece of evidence we have gets filtered through layers of interpretation and revision. Some call it a legend that has been mythologized, while others argue it's simply been transformed over time from a historical kernel.
Definitely. I have to say, though, I'm a bit skeptical of the total mythicist position. I mean, isn't it possible that the core events might have some historical basis that were later, magnified into legend? I'm not completely convinced that there's no historical figure behind the figure.
Fair point, and that's a respectful critique. The historical approach, like that evidenced in John Dominic Crossan's argument, does suggest that there was a real, though perhaps unremarkable or even impermanent person whose life was later mythologized. It's like finding a kernel of corn that sprouted into a giant narrative tree.
Yeah, exactly. And that kernel could explain why early Christians, especially through Paul's revelations, depict Jesus in such celestial terms. It possibly starts as a normal figure and becomes assimilated into the cosmic realm of myth.
Right, and adding to the complexity, Paul's writings, arguably our earliest texts about Jesus, do not delve into traditional aspects of his human life like his birth or miracles. Instead, Paul is more focused on theological revelations and the cosmic significance of Jesus.
That really reframes the conversation, doesn't it? If the earliest accounts elevate him to a celestial status, then perhaps our understanding of Jesus' life in the Gospels, with their miraculous accounts, is more of a later embellishment, a kind of doctrinal evolution.
Yeah, that's the idea. And if we consider the mid-video shock moment in these debates, some suggest that early Christian belief might not have been about a historical man at all, but a symbolic or mythical sacrifice. This shift from a historical figure to a cosmic being leads to the question, was a historical Jesus mythologized, or did a mythical Jesus get historicized?
Right? That question really is the crux of the debate. And it's fascinating because it challenges us to rethink what forms the foundation of faith. Are the stories we inherit more powerful due to their transformation over time? Or is their historical veracity paramount?
Exactly. It becomes deeply personal. For many, the meaning constructed around Jesus matters more than pinpointing historical accuracy. After all, myth can influence culture and thought in ways history alone might not.
Absolutely. Yet, from an academic perspective, the lack of primary contemporary evidence for a historical figure is troubling. The absence of court documents, Roman records, or even simple inscriptions leaves a gap that invites a lot of skepticism.
Right. And that gap fuels the debates among historians, theologians, and even atheists. Every piece of evidence we do have is wrapped in layers of interpretation. The gospel texts were molded long after the events, and external sources like Josephus and Tacitus only add to the puzzle rather than solve it.
It's like trying to piece together a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces coming from different sets entirely. The overall image remains elusive, no matter how many fragments we examine.
Absolutely, and that's why the modern consensus, or rather the lack of one, is so notable. There isn't a single answer that satisfies all. Some scholars say, yes, he existed, but the miracles were later fabrications, while others assert he was an entirely symbolic figure, a composite, a political tool.
Right? And that divergence really showcases the complexity of religious history and memory. It's like every angle reveals a different facet of the legend that billions have embraced over millennia.
Yeah, and to wrap it up, the debate isn't just academic. It's about how myths shape our culture and identity. Whether one views Jesus as a historical teacher, a cosmic figure, or a politically engineered persona, the impact on art, culture, and personal belief is undeniable.
Absolutely. Right. And each interpretation invites us to explore the interplay between fact and myth, history and belief. It reminds us that sometimes the story matters more than determining a definitive historical truth.
Exactly. And every time we dig deeper, we find that the boundaries between historical fact and theological interpretation are much blurrier than we might imagine. It's a dialogue that continues to evolve even today.
Yeah, indeed. I appreciate how this discussion challenges traditional views while opening space for more nuanced interpretations. It really shows that history isn't just about dates and facts, but also about the meanings that we, as communities, build around them.
Right, and that's the beauty of it. Whether you lean towards a historical Jesus, a mythic Christ, or a political construct, what remains clear is that the story has shaped the world in ways that go beyond simple historical accuracy.
Exactly. And perhaps that's the takeaway. There's always room to question, to re-examine, and to appreciate the profound impact that even a legend or multiple legends might have on collective consciousness.
Yes, indeed. It leaves us with open-ended questions and a reminder that sometimes the myth itself can be as powerful as any verifiable historical event. Thanks for this insightful conversation. It's been a real journey through time and thought.
Thank you. It's conversations like these that remind us to keep looking beneath the surface and never stop questioning. Until next time, keep pondering the past and its mysteries.